Hello and welcome to the Digital Health Hackers podcast. I have Rachel Dunscombe with me, who has been recently appointed as openEHR's CEO. And Rachel has been a recovering CIO, and she tells the story. And Rachel, go ahead. What's your story? How did you come across openEHR, and what's going on?
Thank you, Siddharth. So yes, I am a recovering CIO, and this is kind of my therapy for the things that I found were wrong. It's been an interesting journey. So how I became involved in openEHR. The first time I came across openEHR was with a doctor called Marcus Bohr. And actually, I used to curate TEDx conferences, and Marcus contacted me about one of the conferences I was curating, and he wanted to talk about open standards in healthcare. And that was back in 2012. So it's been over a decade. And Marcus got me very interested. So back in the 90s, I've got history with the Apache Foundation, with Linux. I used to be, used to be part of the Linux community. And I found that really, really interesting. But as I was a CIO for, I was in senior roles for well over a decade, I was becoming really frustrated with data. And I had a number of light bulb moments, I think, one of which was, being a CIO of a big organization with 20,000 employees and trying to do patient-led pathways. So, Internet of Things, apps, wearables, self-reported outcomes. And I realized the data model of the EMR just could not deal with these data types. It couldn't deal with the data provenance. It only ever understood that something was clinically recorded, not necessarily recorded by the patient or lifestyle data. And so I ended up getting openEHR to put next to my EMR as an extension to allow me to have the full data model I needed for the kind of models of care for the future, and the sort of community and social care and all of the things that we were doing that didn't fit into a traditional data model of an EMR.
Right.
Um,
So here, let me ask you a question. So again, for the audience, most of them would be aware of an EMR and the EMR being able to do specific things. So
yes.
in your situation, uh, the EMR did not support what you wanted to do. Is that right?
Absolutely. So we were called the Vanguard, and the Vanguard was one of the early integrated care systems. So we were for hospitals, various community services, adult social care, we were the whole stack. And
Right.
when you're trying to do integrated care as much of the world wants to do now, you suddenly realize the EMR is not fit for purpose because it
Mm,
constrains what you can do and it constrains your data model as well. And
right.
so for me, I learned the painful way that the EMR self reinforces more beds in a hospital and all care goes to the hospital. Yeah. And we were trying to counter that, which is why, we put EHR in. Um, and that's a really interesting principle because I got very interested then in the data, and we had over 1,000 systems, even alongside the EMR.
So
Um,
why open EHR here? So let's say that you are a technologist and you just want a solution to this problem. Somebody would just start building their own applications or start
right.
using their own databases and spin up a MongoDB instance or a MySQL instance. So what got you into open EHR specifically?
So I think it was two things. One was the feral nature of systems that were just growing exponentially, the data sources. And we were above cognitive load in managing our data. We just could not manage that amount of variance of data. The second thing was I had a really big team of clinicians that I'd employed, and they needed to lead what data was needed. Many of them had also put through programs in data science, right? So they were pretty savvy. They knew about data. And for me, it was really important that we had convergence, not divergence, and that we had a clinically led approach. And actually, openEHR is the only real thing. Fire didn't cut the mustard. We also had worked with Fire, but for storage and pervading the data, if you need the full extendable record, you need data provenance, you need, the ability to create a longitudinal record. openEHR is the only thing that would cut it. And we did some really deep evaluation on that.
Okay, and this is like how many years ago was this?
So this was mid 2010s, yeah.
Okay.
So a good few years ago, we were one of the first organizations to engage with it. And actually, there's another piece to this, because I'd got really interested in why were we above cognitive load? Why could we not design the future? Why could we not do all of this stuff that was based in the home or patient led? And I did a diagnostic with some academics in the US. And the thesis of that was, why are we above cognitive load, and why can't we make the future happen? And that diagnostic used something called viable systems model, and it came out with the fact that we had gross unwarranted variation in data, and that we were not engineering data correctly. And that was another light bulb moment. Suddenly you're like, oh yeah, I should have known that, right? But it was really clear to me. And what we've let happen here, my analogy is, we design hospitals now so that they are fit for purpose, and they are a single big building with everything integrated. So your theaters will be near recovery, will be near, other things that you need. We design it so it functions as a whole. Data is part of the infrastructure of the future. It's like the elastic walls of the hospital or healthcare system. And we need to design it so, it's fit for purpose. We need to engineer it. And actually, the engineering that's under openEHR is rigorous. And for me, it was, we've designed data as if it's a set of medieval huts, and a hospital is like a set of medieval huts if you look, at the data paradigm. Whereas we need to be designing it like you design really great hospital facilities. It needs that level of rigor.
That's a very interesting point. It's, because back in India, when people are expanding their hospitals, it often happens that they don't really plan in advance. They just, the operating theater is on the 10th floor, and the OPD where they need to register for the operating theater is on the first floor. So all of this happens. And your point about data not being an afterthought, but a first class citizen where you consider it part of the infrastructure, makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And the UK government has now got a unit called the Unit for Intangible Assets that allows data and IP on top of it to be capitalized in a similar way to buildings. There's other parts of the world that are following suit, because data has a lifespan of decades. What's recorded about, one of my sons when he's born and he goes into NICU is actually going to play out for the life risk stratification of his chest health. Yeah, in 80 years, that data is still valid. Well-engineered data now will last, but what goes on top will come and go. There'll be voice-driven, gesture-driven, goodness knows what else driven in 30 years. And so if we engineer data well, it's like the really good foundations that will stay, but actually the technology will mature on top of that and will make it more utility. So you have to think differently. You have to think data first to engineer well for longevity. We want to build the equivalent of something that will last decades or millennia even, whereas at the moment we buy the cheapest thing and the data's an afterthought.
Yeah, and I think people pay the price, right? Like going
Right.
for an application first approach, just by looking at the feature set, what you get is you get data as an afterthought. You get locked in to one single application, integration nightmares, and just this data first approach itself is kind of new. People are starting to get it into their heads. So, what do
Yeah.
you think?
Yeah. So I think my aim is to change people's paradigm and see that data is the key. Yeah. Because that's the journey that, I've got scars on my back from learning that. I'd rather other people didn't have to have the scars. Yeah. And, there are so many bright people in this community who've seen that far easier than me, I think. But, data improves lives and saves lives. I was part of Connected Health Cities and Data Saves Lives, where we had an account of lives saved and improved using data. The really nice thing about us all working on this is we are actually contributing to saving lives.
Of course, like I keep saying this again and again, which is like, the amount of patients that you can touch with software and data just like far exceeds anything else. And poor quality data just makes things so much harder where it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And the integration nightmares, when you transfer things between systems and they're not talking the same language, this loss of semantics, loss of data, it's just a whole
It,
different,
it's
yeah.
crazy. It is. And for anyone that's listening, you do not understand how complex running a health system is, because I also run the data across city region. I think this is the biggest data challenge on the globe. It's really challenging. And, for me, interoperability, there's warranted interoperability, and that will always be there in the future. We will always need HL7 and FHIR. We will always need those things. But if we carry on at our current trajectory, the point-to-point links and the unwarranted manipulation of data to make things work but lose meaning, so making it lossy, that is going to become critically, or already has become critically unsafe in many places.
Safety concern.
Yeah, a clinical safety, right?
Of course. And I think ties back down to having one single standard in the middle with all the applications on the outside, as opposed to just n into n number of connections that you make with different systems.
Right,
Just like
right.
unscalable.
It is completely unscalable. I mean, you know what? In telephone exchanges, we go to a central point and then everything, sort of routes from there. We don't have spaghetti wires of point to point between everybody's phones. It's just not well engineered. And I was really lucky to do, work with EY on this over the past 5-6 years. And there was one paper we put out probably 2-3 years ago now called How Will You Design Information Architecture to Unlock the Power of Data? And I was one of the co-authors on that. And actually, you talk about the future. EY have been really visionary. And it's been fantastic to actually work with them and their teams on this. And they've got some really nice thoughts, which are also echoed by Gartner, around with the composable enterprise, but the data layer at the center. And that doesn't mean a single data repository. We can use things like IHE to, if we've got one data standard, to virtually join the data together, but a single data layer. And as we move into the kind of cognitive age, the evidence is showing that the better the data, the better the performance of AI or large language models. And I've been doing a lot of work on that recently. So, I wouldn't have thought about that when I put openEHR in originally, a good few years ago. But now, I'm seeing the fact that openEHR is really important, and EY are writing more and more about why openEHR is important for the coming cognitive age. So yeah, for me, if we're going to use all of the tools and technology that we need for the future, we're going to have to really invest in the foundations of data, because it's the main enabler.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And there is a lot of new technologies that are coming out there, the microservices world. And it seems like people tend to build with the startup ethos in their heads, like build fast, break things. You're not going to last that long anyway. So just, use your own data standards. But then when you come to a field like healthcare, that just starts breaking down. And when people usually question, why are you doing this over something like a standard, you have a data application layer where you have the data application and logic as one single layer in a system. And I think it ties back down to the field itself, like healthcare, you need the data to persist over generations, right?
You do. I mean, it's along with probably other high reliability industries like aviation and nuclear, we need huge amounts of data over decades to build in safety, quality. It's really, really important. And for me, creating the understanding from policy down that is the case, that you need to invest in the foundations, and what the foundations look like is really important. So, I've done a lot of work in policy, and, I think we are coming to this realization now that we're in a very different age, the data enabled age. So yeah, it's not an easy journey, because there are so many people that are still not really up to speed in why this is so important. It's hidden, right? It's hard to build a picture of data in your head. You can see other things. You can see a GUI, you can see a system, but understanding data is almost an abstract. So we have to, paint metaphors and pictures so that people can frame this in their heads.
Yeah, and I love this illustration. And I mean, if you can zoom that in a little bit for the audience. Um, so,
Let me
yep,
take this and
much
yeah,
better.
zoom it in. So yeah, so that this particular set of diagrams, these were put together with EY, and I actually created the one on the right. And the view there, as we said before, is that you've got the data layer. You are going to have AI because AI is absolutely coming. You've got the logic units, and then all of the different applications. And that sort of architecture should fit and pervade for decades, and that data layer should have longevity. So, for me, this is a very different way of looking. And obviously, we're very brownfield. Many of our sites, have got history and legacy and old data. And what interests me is how we use openEHR both to build for the future, but also to really migrate legacy systems and data so we don't lose what we've already got. Yeah. So, connecting to legacy data, as they're doing, say, in Catalonia, and normalizing it into openEHR so we can get as much of the data together as possible. So, in essence, these sorts of things are supported by openEHR, by FHIR, by SNOMED, by, LOINC, all of those things, which work together, and we're working together as communities now to create a data ecosystem that is fit for purpose for today, tomorrow, and the future.
Got it. So the smaller components in the diagram, they keep changing. The logical units may change. The AI may change, but the data layer
Yeah,
is
it's
consistent.
extensible. Yeah, we will record more data over time as we get more sensors, apps, wearables. But yeah, it's an extensible data layer that can deal with everything we need to deliver new models of care. That was my main issue with EMRs. It constrained the models of care we could deliver by its data model.
So you can only do what the EMR is designed to do.
Right. And that's designed by a committee of thousands of people. And it's the lowest common denominator. So, me as somebody sat in the UK trying to get on a roadmap of US vendor, forget it, right? And we do healthcare differently to the US, and yeah, all of those things. The other thing I'd like to touch on, and you talked about, startups. I was on a call last night with a startup that I did some workshops with 3-4 years ago and tried to encourage them to use openEHR. And they showed me what they'd done. I've not touched them in a long time. And they got it and they've used it. And they've done some pretty brilliant things. And it's really exciting. But also, I ran the accelerator for a life sciences company. I
Mhm.
won't say who because, I don't want to share too much of the granular detail. But that involved, about 18 companies. And a very high percentage of them got contracts at the end. But what we did as they went through that accelerator was surround them with all of the knowledge they needed. They were taught about openEHR, they were taught about FHIR, they were taught, about how they could look into the clinical models that openEHR has and how it could expedite their journey. Because if you're going to start an app for something, yeah, and you've got to create the data model and understand it, and you need clinicians to do that, openEHR can actually be a really good jump start to you as an SME. So actually you know, this sort of data layer architecture allows ecosystem players, large and small, to coexist, but nobody to have an unfair advantage on somebody else.
That makes a lot of sense too. I think definitely for people who don't know the data models, reinventing it from scratch and putting it in their own data layer as opposed to having it all done is definitely a jump start.
It's a jump start. So for me, I used it in the accelerator, and I was blown away by how many of those companies got contracts at the end of it. So, it was so much fun teaching small startups and collaborating with them. But yeah, it's not something that is inequitable, openEHR. It's something that helps everybody that's working in digital health.
Yeah, definitely. And again, like coming back to the extensible data layer that needs to be vendor neutral, I
Yeah.
think you're doing a lot of work. You're collaborating with a lot of other committees who are doing similar work. Can you talk a bit more about what you're doing, what the direction of
Yes.
openEHR with these committees are?
So we're hoping we should be joining the JIC shortly, next month. The JIC is really a sort of group of standards bodies that work in, healthcare. So you've got the likes of HL7 there, you've got SNOMED there, you've got LOINC there, you've got ISO there. And we're working closely with some of those bodies as well. We're just working at the moment on a partnership agreement with SNOMED, who've been very kind and very gracious to us about giving us access to the SNOMED full terminology set for our development API. And so, the thing for me as a former practitioner, having used all of these standards, is they're all really important, and I can put into context why we need to work together and how we need to work together and what it might really mean. And so, in the past, I think the different communities may have been very polarized. Yeah. People believed in this standard, but they didn't understand that standard. But, I'm just writing an academic paper with some of the people from the other standards bodies that we're going to publish. And actually, what I'd say now is we've realized we're really not competing. We're complementary. There may be an overlap on the Venn diagram a bit with some of this, storage and fire, storage and open air. You might do a mix of the two, but, fire doesn't cut it for the full extensible model. But I think we're all conceding that now. And so for me, when I work with those people, I very much come from a place of having been a practitioner and having to make this work. And the reality, and what I want to leave behind as a legacy for people, is a set of blueprints or architectures or other sort of patterns that people can use to create really useful info structures to save lives and improve lives. I think we're moving into a space now where we're all seeing that the prize is so big in terms of healthcare. I was working with a health system outside of the US, and basically its state budget within the next 10 to 12 years, every dollar of that state budget will be spent on healthcare on the current trajectory, right? If they actually change the models of care supported by data, they're a sustainable health system. We don't want to close schools, libraries, roads, whatever. And so for me, I think the people within the standards bodies are now much more versed in the kind of health economics of why we do this. And so it's really nice to be working with them all.
Yeah, sounds really good. I think if you are able to come out with one single stack, like this is it, go and build on top of this, store your data in this way, and innovate on new modes of care, new delivery methods. That makes a lot of sense. We'll be saving millions
Yeah.
of lives and millions of
Right.
dollars and pounds as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We will make health systems sustainable, and this is part of the foundation, right? So the health economics of it really interests me, and I've done work with LSE, London School of Economics, on some of the sort of economic models around why we need to do this. And actually, I'm convinced it is the biggest single thing getting the data right that we can do to get health systems back on track to sustainability.
Yeah, it sounds really good. And just a curious question as part of your research, have you ever considered at what point an organization benefits from adopting something like openEHR? When they grow in size, for example, the bigger they are, the more and more they see the need for the common data lake and the more money they save. Is there a cutoff point where we can, confidently tell someone that if you are not going to do data lakes, forget it, you're just going to spend so much money on nonsense that you're not doing this right? And is there like organizations maybe smaller than a particular size that we can tell them like, okay, it's okay to go in this route?
So not particularly size. I think this is
Okay.
still applicable to all size. I think there is an argument, if you look at certain geographies around the world where they're running a very traditional healthcare model
Hmm.
and they do not have patient flows or significant patient flows across bounds, they may be able to survive with a traditional EMR because it's serving their needs and it's one source of truth. That, there are places like that. And so I would not encourage anyone to be ripping and replacing their EMR in that situation unless they had a break point, But I think as soon as you are in a health system where you have patient flows, where you have complexity, where you have multiple systems, the bigger and more complex the organization, the more compelling the case to move towards this. I don't, I've not got exact kind of parameters around this, but it's interesting. If you're a specialist center, say an oncology center, whatever, you might be able to deal with everything within your existing system internally. But the question then is, how are you incentivized to manage the patient flows to other providers and care settings? And what we see across the globe is financial incentives are not necessarily aligned. You're incentivized to have something that's fit for purpose internally, but you're not incentivized to then allow that data to flow to the GP or to, a hospital that's seeing somebody for cardiology or whatever else. And I think our systems need to incentivize this because the future models of care globally need further consolidation and specialization. And unless data can flow, we cannot do that safely. We bleed, we irradiate people. And what we need to do is make sure that the data can flow seamlessly. And so I would say where you don't have the incentives aligned within healthcare systems, I'd still encourage people to do the right thing, but I would absolutely say it's hard for them because they don't get rewarded for, allowing the data to flow to other care settings.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And again, this is another difficult question, but I've been reading a lot about the patient-centric care record and
Mm-hmm.
how the data of a patient should flow with them, right?
Yeah.
Now, OpenAir and these health data platforms, they recommend having a single data layer for a particular organization. So let's say all of the NHS is on one single data layer. But what happens when you want this data to move between organizations? Have we been looking at what protocols to use here?
So I've been looking in two countries around using IHE profiles and then federating with, multiple endpoints. And, that absolutely is possible. And, there's some really good IHE deployments that I, have been involved with. And so for me, that's possible when you have consistent data. If you've got a huge variety of data, that just wouldn't scale. And so I think the IHE model for me is really the way forward for that. Obviously, you have to build in all of the permissioning, audit, trail transparency, and transparency for the citizen, right? The citizen needs to, needs to be able to understand how their data is being used. And again, I've used various products across city region to do that before now. But I think the interesting thing for me with patient centricity, my vision, and I've said this to some policymakers before now, is, certainly in Europe, GDPR real time. I want my entire record, my digital twin real time. I want to be able to take it on holiday with me. I want to be able to show it to somebody halfway across the world. I want to own my healthcare data and journey. And I think that's the kind of vision, really. Under GDPR, certainly in our geography, you get the right to your data within 20 days, all of it if you want. Well, let's make that real time and in a consistent format, right? So, if we want to activate patients to engage more with their healthcare journey and participate in health, we need to do this. But yes, I can definitely see a technical way through, and I'm involved certainly at two national levels in talking about that.
Okay, it's good to see that actually being taken into consideration. So, what excites you? And I think it seems like OpenAir has been gaining a lot of momentum in these few years than all of its history combined. So, what do you think is changing, and what excites you for the future?
I think what excites me is the people in the community, right? Because this is very different to the traditional way of doing things. And so the clinical modeling is the gold here. And what excites me is the community that sits around the clinical modeling and everything that supports it. Because what we have is a set of people that share values, right? They share values about an open commons, which improves lives and saves lives. And I think I love coming to work every day because I work with the coolest people. It is therapy, as I said, for being a former CIO, because I kind of felt I was colluding with things that were broken, but now I can be part of fixing the future. So what really excites me is the progress that we can make. What really excites me is the possibilities, the possibilities, everything from research across multiple countries with consistent data for cancers and rare diseases. I'm involved with openEHR in the development of biologics we're supporting, for treatments with an N of 1 for stage 4 cancers. It excites me that we can activate the citizen and engage them with their data. Yeah. And I think there's going to be a whole new generation of medicine which is about, very much as the wearables industry has been about, knowing your data and being able to action it and really optimize your health based on what you know. So the future for me is being part of a community that is doing incredible things and actually doing it on a truly not-for-profit basis. This is, something that is quite extraordinary, really.
Okay, that's definitely something to wake up in the morning for and go to work. It sounds
Yeah,
exciting.
for sure. Right.
So, Rachel, anything else that you want to tell the audience before we part?
Well, just if anyone is not yet a member of openEHR, please come and join us, because the more people we have working on this, the more people that are part of the community, the better we can make everything, and the more we can get done. And I've got a sense of impetus. So I would just say, if anyone's not a member, come and join us.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the description down below. And Rachel, maybe your paper as well. I'll attach that
Thank
in
you.
the description as well. So it was amazing talking to you, and I learned a lot. So thank you again for taking the time, and see you in the next one.
Thank you, Siddharth, and thank you for all your work.